the idea of math education is kind of more around the how do I do it mindset. And the shift that I'd want to see is to a something more like, how do I use this as a tool?
Welcome, friends, to a podcast with interesting people. Education is going to be the topic of today's podcast. It has its share of challenges, and it seems that no matter what amount of money we throw at it, that the taxpayers paying for the education system, we still have educational challenges, especially math. Math seems to be a tough one to crack, right? Everybody hates it, or most people hate it if you ask them. And what is the core of that resentment? Why? How is that happening? When is that happening? What's the source of that aversion? And what can we do to help our kids to love math and excel at it? And in these series of conversations with interesting people, I invite people who are subject matter experts, and to get a perspective on math specifically, education of math and what can be done about it. I invited a guest to the show. He developed an online math teaching platform that promises to teach kids 1 year worth of math in 3 months. So I'm very excited to introduce him to you and talk everything about education and math and maybe share what can be done about that. So without further ado, Aditya Nagrath, the founder and CEO of elephantlearning.com, is our guest today. Thank you for being on the show. Thank you for, sharing what you're going to share in terms of what you've developed and what can be done. And before we're going to jump into kind of learning a little bit more about you and why you're doing it, I want to kind of start off with a question. Why is math such a huge problem? Why do we suck at math? What's the issue?
Well, first, thank you for having me here, Adrian. I don't think that we necessarily suck at math. I think that what's happening is that students are kind of entering our education system unprepared for the curriculum. And because of that, there's a language gap that's occurring between the student and the teacher. And what we see is that when the student understands the teacher, whether it's math class or anything else, the outcome is a lot better. And so really what Elephant Learning, our math platform, is geared to do is to help bridge that math gap so that the teacher is now effective, or the parent is now effective in communicating with the student, at least as it pertains to mathematics.
The math seems to be, starting at a young age, kids, it's kind of easy to learn, the basics. But then at some point, a lot of kids just are hitting a wall, right? There's something that happens that basically they just come home one day and they're like, oh, I hate math. This really sucks. I don't get it. I don't understand. What is it in your experience that you think is just kind of causing that, or having kids from, because the rudimentary stuff, algebra and arithmetic is fairly easy. It's just kind of later on, like when it kind of builds up. Do you have any ideas, like why is that happening, that at some point kids are just kind of switching off and are like really eyes glazed over and they're like, I'm out. I really don't get it. I don't care for it. I must not be a numbers person.
Well, honestly, this happens pretty early for many kids. And the issue tends to be that the idea of math education is kind of more around the how do I do it mindset. And the shift that I'd want to see is to something more like, how do I use this as a tool, right? Because if we could use the mental concepts as a tool for problem solving, then the how do you do it comes more naturally, right? And so what it is that, like, we see the scores for mathematics stay pretty good right up until algebra. And then in middle school, this is where we tend to see our students drop off versus the rest of the world. And what happens at algebra is we begin having conversations around mathematics. So what comes prior to algebra is basically definition. What's a number? What is addition? What is subtraction? What is multiplication, division? What are fractions? And fractions tend to be a big stumbling block because we change the nomenclature of how we use the numbers at that point. So like when you start saying 1/5, some of the students hadn't got used to writing the numbers without that slash in between. So that tends to be problematic. So anyway, I guess the answer to the question, right? The issue tends to be that, like, if the student doesn't understand, we go to this how do you do it mentality, and we show them how to solve the problem, thinking that if they get the right answer and it gets them to the next step, then that's good enough. And really what's happening is that the basic ideas are not actually being learned. So when we talk about having a conceptual understanding of mathematics, what we're talking about is actually having the experience of give me 5 things, give me 4 more things, and then being able to connect that to what's written in the classroom, which is 5 plus 4, right? And how many things do I have? Oh, I have 9. So like being able to connect those two ideas together so that there's a concrete representation behind what's written, and then being able to apply those ideas to solve problems. That's what tends to be important. But what we tend to continue to focus on, and again, it's mainly to get us to the next step, mainly to pass the test, mainly to, well, if I could just get them to algebra, they're going to be okay. We seem to just miss that. And the result is that the student, from the student's perspective, the student is engaging in memorization without understanding. And whenever you engage in memorization without understanding, the subject's going to feel a lot harder than it actually is.
So is it the application that's a secret sauce that is missing in a lot of this, where people are just getting into this place of it's just too abstract and they don't see the utility of it maybe? You know, like it's easy to do, like when you have just, you know, addition and subtraction and multiplication, just the basics, right? That's something that kids understand, like, oh, I have this many and so on, right? It has some kind of footing in reality, right? Versus like once you're going to get into maybe fractions is not too much abstract, but maybe at some point it does become like, oh, when you have like these really scary looking fractions and they don't see what is the utility of this, and then you moving on, and then you have like getting into calculus and so on. If you don't pin that into some specific application that students see, then that's probably where a lot of the division happens. They're like, like why am I even learning this? When am I going to use this ever, right?
The when am I going to use this question comes often, correct? And here's the problem, is that if you didn't understand the concept, you're not going to use it. And that's not even true. So like I'm saying that, but what I've learned is that, like, for example, I have someone that works in my yard and he can't read. And we were driving to the dump once, and I said, you got to turn right on Dartmouth. And he blew right past Dartmouth. And I'm like, dude, what's up? And he's like, I can't read. But, you know, one day I went to the ATM and one of the 20s got stuck in my pocket, and I handed him a wad of cash, and he knew that I didn't pay him the correct amount of money. So he can multiply 20s, but he can't read. He needs it to survive in this world.
Right. I want to like, so, who the heck do you have who doesn't know how to read? What happened? I got to pull on that a little bit.
I guess he grew up in a farm town in Mexico, so it is what it is, right?
Gotcha.
But to bring it back to what we're talking about here, so like,
right.
You know, one time we were at this chili festival, and we had these computers set up for students at different levels. And I mean, the key to our system is that we have to feed them puzzles at the right level for them to experience learning. And so anyway, the girl came up and said, I'm working multiplication division in school. And so we put her on the multiplication division computer, and this question came up, and it was 4 groups of 5 objects. And I watched her count all 20 objects to get the answer. And then I asked her, well, what's 4 times 5? And she immediately said 20. So she has her multiplication tables memorized, but she doesn't know how to use multiplication to solve a real life problem that's right in front of her.
Mm-hmm.
Now, having said that, once I've said that and she connected the two ideas, she had that aha moment. Multiplication now became useful to her.
Right.
It now has some real life meaning. And the issue is that if we don't give the student that real life meaning, when you get to algebra and we start to have conversations in mathematics, which is really what the shift is, right? And you start to say 4 times x equals whatever. Well, if you memorize your multiplication tables and you didn't understand that, what does that even mean? There's no way that you're going to now, how do I do it out of this problem?
The statement that you make on your website, which is the claim that you through your platform, kids and students can learn 1 year of math in 3 months. That's a tall, order claim. Tell me a little bit more about that. How are you getting this done, and how did you discover what you discovered that you implemented on this platform that kids using it have these kinds of results?
Well, I think the best way to talk about this is this. So, let's start with the results. What we did was we're focused on teaching mathematics as a language. We're focused on teaching the concepts, just exactly what I had just told you about just a second ago, right? And what we do is we focus on the essential topics, meaning that if I can teach your student what addition is, then the rest of the curriculum items are sort of easier, right? Because if you understand addition, addition on the clock is not too far off. And then what we did was on the milestones for these curriculum items, we basically placed an age on it. So that's the age of the student in the classroom on average, based on when it's being taught within, say, Common Core or the state curriculum. To be honest with you, mathematics doesn't change much state from state or country to country. So really, we're talking about the same ideas, just when is it placed in the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
And basically what we do is we take the 5 milestones that the student has most recently passed that have the highest elephant ages, and we average that together, and we give that to the student as their elephant age, which is the average age that a student outside of our system is doing the same math as your student. And basically, if you see at any given elephant age what a student's answering, it looks about right. So what we do then is we measure over time, as the student is playing, what is the change in the elephant age? And what we found is that on average, students in our system learn around a year and a half of mathematics over the course of 10 weeks when they use the system about 22 minutes per week on average.
Wow.
The more they used it, the more gain they had. And so basically, to make the guarantee, we're mathematicians, we said, how do we increase our odds of success? The learn 1 year of math in 3 months, it sounds better than a year and a half. It's a lot simpler than 10 weeks. It gives us another 2 or 3 weeks on the platform. And the 30 minutes also sounds better. So we increased the time in the platform to 30 minutes. And so we were going to get the results. We knew that. And there's some people that they fall through the cracks and they call us up and ask for a refund, and we give it to them. We ask them what went wrong so that we can kind of understand, we can improve the experience. And the goal is to empower children with mathematics. That's really it. Our mission is empower children with mathematics. Our vision is to change the way the world teaches mathematics. It feels like what's actually happened, and it's nobody's fault, right? I mean, it's just how we've taught mathematics for the last N generations, right? But it feels like the philosophy of this school is, here, add until you understand what it is. And what our system allows parents and teachers to do is, here's an understanding of what addition is, and now you can go understand the teacher when she's teaching you how to add in the classroom. And the results are honestly amazing. It's not uncommon for us to have 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds getting as far as fractions and decimals and percentages, getting into our algebra curriculum. these concepts aren't beyond the students. Like, the research shows that they can exhibit concepts as advanced as division during play, like for your 4-year-old dividing up the tea evenly. It's the adults in the room that don't think that they're going to understand those ideas, that don't label them, because that's how children learn language, right? You label the ideas as they're coming up in real life. That is kind of robbing them of that experience. And so our system kind of proves that we can give them those ideas, and then the teacher can build a how-to on top of that. And if you do it in that way, it no longer becomes about memorization. It becomes about, how do I solve the problem? And these how do I do it's that the parent and the teacher teach, which is how we were taught, right? So that's how we're naturally going to try to teach it. That then starts to make sense, right? It makes sense why you're carrying the one. It makes sense why all these things are happening. And if you get that, well, then that student's not going to struggle at all. They're going to come out of the education system feeling great. They're going to understand their college professors, and they're going to go out and get jobs and be successful.
The methods that's being taught in school, and there's a variety of different approaches, but I've heard anecdotal stories where parents are like, well, this is not how I was taught math, and now it's being taught this way, and if a child does the homework and they solve the problem in a different way, that's still being marked against them because they didn't follow the specific method, and that seems to be maybe even a problem for like parents who are trying to assist kids. How are you? How is your platform teaching this? Is it in terms of what are you employing to make those concepts, what you just described, work for the kids, so it's not the same thing that's being done in the school?
Yeah. So what we've done is we've taken the latest in early age education science, and they have activities that are now known to most effectively teach these ideas. And to be honest with you, these experiences are very straightforward, right? So like, give me 5 things, give me 4 more things. How many things do I have now? Or maybe I have 2 groups of things, and well, which one has more, right? Oh, well, and how many more does it have, right? And it becomes all about the language, because they can potentially count to get the answer. At some point, we start to use curtains to force them to use more advanced strategies than counting. But they're having the mathematical experiences that are going to get them to understand it. And to be honest with you, at this point, the way I'm considering it is that mathematical experience is the concept. And so in other words, if your student doesn't have that experience of give me 5 things, give me 4 more things, how many things do I have now? It's even hard to explain to them what addition is, right? Like, there's no way to instruct it. I compare it to the colors. You cannot instruct a student on what the color red is. You can look up red in the dictionary, and it's got some, nanometer of light, whatever the waves, however they measure it. Yeah, exactly. And so but you can't tell that to a 3-year-old, and, to even a normal human being, that's not going to make sense. They have to see red, you have to label it. And the same thing's kind of happening for mathematics. And that's why maybe that it's challenging, right? Because when you're sitting in a room with 30 students with varied experiences, and you write 5 + 4 = 9 on the board, and not all those students have had the experience of give me 5 things, give me 4 more things, how many things do I have now? Or maybe they didn't even understand it when they did it, right? So this is like some repetition. They have to do it several times, just like you have to show the student red several times in order for them to understand you're talking about the color. And so, we put that in place, and it's extremely straightforward for the parent. But on top of that, we have teaching built straight into the platform. So we give the parent what would be told to a teacher in continuing education for mathematics on how to teach this particular subject. So how we are actually intending to teach it, along with activities that you can do with your student outside of the system, which is now what connects it to real life, right? So like, for example, if your student's learning to count, we might tell you to go play a board game. They have to roll the die, they have to identify the number, they then have to move that number of spaces. So they're getting a lot of practice counting, right? But they're doing it in gameplay with you, the parent, meaning that now this is survival to them. And that's really what it's about, right? Because if we can turn it into hey, I'm using this in everyday life, problem solving, then the math becomes useful, right? And that's
Right.
when, for example, when you get to algebra and you start to see things like, again, 7x, I mean, I'm making up a new one, 7x equals 49, right? Solve for x. It becomes natural how you're going to manipulate to solve for it because you've already had the experience of, well, I know that this is kind of the same as division and really, right? And honestly, what we do with students, I'd say to traditional educational platform, it's kind of amazing. We introduce variable very early. We introduce Boolean logic. We even saw like a psychological research paper that said developmentally 8-year-olds cannot do Boolean logic. And it's like, why? Because we can't define the word and or to a student. So we do it, and they're learning it. And the thing is that as they're coming through this curriculum, the feedback that we're getting from parents is that the student is actually pointing out to the parent in everyday life where the mathematics is occurring. And it is everywhere. I mean, when you start talking about fractions, decimals, and percentages, I mean, I don't know how you live life without those, to be honest, because nothing's really in hold, right? I mean, they're priced with pennies at some point.
Right. Well, now the problem is that a lot of it is just credit cards or debit cards, and so people don't have that. They don't have that exposure anymore because they're like, just put it on a card and whatever it is, if you need to add a tip or something, there's a button for that. You click on it, boom, 10%, 15%, whatever it is, right? So like in a way, some of it is being taken away.
Well, typically speaking, what's occurred, and the percentages stay even, right? So I have charts on this, and if we had that other thing working, I could throw the chart up on the screen. But basically, 4 out of 5 students, so 80% of students, enter kindergarten unprepared for the kindergarten curriculum, meaning that the kindergarten curriculum assumes that the student can count to 10. And for the parent, that means the student says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. For kindergarten, they mean, give me 10 things. The kid slides over 10 things and stops on 10, and they know what 10 means. So this gap, this understanding gap, completely happens among income lines, meaning that only the top 20% income earners enter prepared. The other 80% are behind, and it's slanted, meaning that the bottom 20% are the furthest behind. So now, if you think about the numbers, right, these students are playing catch up because it's extremely rare for anyone to not make it through kindergarten. So they get past the first grade, right? Even in first grade, there's this mentality of, well, if I fail the student, isn't that going to be worse for them than if I don't? And for the most part, memorization strategy can get the grades high enough that, again, the student can get through. And at some point, you get to this idea of now we're going to change the way that we write the numbers down, right? And that's what I mean when I say we switch the nomenclature on the student. So they didn't have a strong grasp to begin with, and now all of a sudden we're throwing in like this advanced use of how we write them down, really, right? It means something completely different. 1/4 does not mean anything having anything to do with 1 and 4 besides you take the whole piece and you divide it into 4 equal. Then you take one of those pieces, right? But that's a completely different way of using the numbers. And so at this point, it's probably not uncommon for students to throw their hands up and say, what the hell is going on? When the teacher says, here's how you add 2 fractions, they memorize the procedure without having understanding of what's happening underneath. There's this idea of right or wrong, meaning that now like you start to introduce percentages and decimals and which is the right system to use, right? And as soon as math becomes about right or wrong and it stops becoming about problem solving and, using this to, using mathematics as a tool to solve real life problems, to solve the problems that are confronting us every day, well, then at that point, right, I mean, it's hard to figure out how to recover, because that's the basis of anxiety. That's the basis of math anxiety. The basis is, well, if I answer it incorrectly, people are going to think I'm stupid, or they're going to think this, or they're going to think that. And, that becomes a context for disempowerment. And the only way to cure that context for disempowerment is understanding, is giving them that language and showing them that this isn't actually that complex. And as soon as a student gets that, we see a complete turnaround in them. That's why we get testimonials where parents say, that my student now goes to class and they're having fun. Like, math is now fun for them, which is isn't that a great problem to have?
Yeah, no, that's, you kind of touched on, and I don't want to interrupt you, but you touched on, I think, a couple of very important things to bring up, which is gamification, right? Kids learn through playing games and through failing a lot, and it seems like we've failing is a bad word, like, oh, you fail, like whether it's just using the language to describe it, oh, you got an F, or you've failed, and instead of like, well, let's take this as an opportunity to figure out what happened there, right? Like, why did you fail? What happened there? And kind of have that analysis of it and reframe it for the kids so that they don't have that anxiety that, oh, I have to memorize these things. I have this methodology that I follow to solve this equation, and then I really don't understand what's happening underneath it. I know how to pass this test because I'll memorize it, and the moment they pass it, they want to just kind of erase it out of their brain because it's just difficult to memorize a lot of these things. But if you build everything around gamification, where they can use this as a almost like a playtime thing, even like the simple example that you gave, which is like, you got a board, you throw a die, and here's how many steps you got to go, right? And that's like immediate implementation of math. They learn how to count. They learn all these basic concepts. So taking that to the next level, gamifying more and more stuff would be an awesome thing to kind of continue that and continue to have that engagement. Is that what you guys are doing at Elephant Learning?
So we started with the gamification of algebra, but when you actually look at it, it doesn't feel so much as a game. And so what we really want to do once they've gotten past the basic mathematics, so like the gamification works really, really well for modeling like real life type problems, right? So like, to give you a good example, we cover fractions, decimals, and percentages through area, through on the line, and through a quantity of items, right? So like, oh, here's 6 things, select 2/3 of them,
right?
And so like, for example, when you're looking at an area and you're looking at a sliver of it, and you're looking at it from a perspective of there's different sizes of slivers, at that point it becomes pretty clear to the student as to why they need to find a common denominator to add them together.
Right.
Now, when you move to algebra, and this is kind of one of the problems that we see that we're trying to solve, and we're trying to solve it through getting messages out there onto Facebook where we can tell people that, hey, listen, let's just think about this a little bit differently, is this idea of algebra, right? So what I say, and I think now it'll make perfect sense because we've had all of this build up to here, what I like to say is algebra is where we start having conversations in mathematics. And actually the issue tends to be that maybe the teacher in the high school setting doesn't have the conversations like human beings have conversations. When I got into upper level mathematics at the college level, they actually do kind of spell it out better, meaning that, like, for example, suppose you're talking about the question I just gave you a minute ago, like 7x equals 49. How would you see that necessarily in the middle school context? Solve for x, 7x equals, right? In upper level mathematics, they actually wrote a sentence. They said, well, let x be a number, and suppose that 7x equals 49. What is x? Now, that wasn't the content, but that's how they write it. And I think it's a disservice that we're doing for the students right now, where we don't say that, because, one, why is 7x equal 49 even true? It's only true because the context of the problem said that this is true, and now because this is true, you need to figure out what x is. And again, if you're stuck in the context of right or wrong, then this is a very scary situation. Now, to touch on that point, because you talked about it for a moment, I think it's pretty important. And I think, like, for example, when I got to upper level mathematics and they started having these things more as a conversation, there's a very defined process. They define ideas, and then they start to ask questions about these ideas. And a very interesting thing happened, which was that one of my professors in a T actually kind of called me out. He said, you always raise your hand, but whenever you answer, it tends to be wrong. And everyone was kind of laughing a little bit. And I said to the professor, I said, hey, look, I always did okay on the test. He says, yeah, you did really well on the test. I said, well, if I hadn't raised my hand and I hadn't said to you what I thought the right answer was, right, you would not have understood that I didn't understand, first of all. But even when I told you what I thought the right answer was and why, you knew what I didn't understand. And you were able to basically clarify it to me. And so, like, to be honest with you, during grad school, I took notes. I never looked at them again. I stopped taking notes at some point because I thought, what's the point? I just focused on understanding what we were talking about. And then the things that would happen on the exams and the homework would come naturally. And what we learned was that the same thing is true for the young students, right? So that's actually our process for teaching them. It's what the researchers found out. And I see the pattern, so we're going to continue the pattern all the way. The idea is can we define the numbers to someone who's learning to count, right? So, like, can we tell them how many things do I have, right? That's more of a recognition. So the first step is defining. The next step is recognition, which is when I raised my hand and I said whatever I saw, right? They're testing to see if I can recognize how the concepts would play. And then the last step is the actual application, meaning that now you give them a problem where it's not obvious that you have to use addition or subtraction or multiplication. And you see if they do apply multiplication in order to solve it. And if they do, they're now producing it, right? And this is where parents would see the problem, because that's exactly what word problems are. And a lot of parents see that their students have issues with word problems. So this is an indicator that maybe the student memorized the multiplication tables, but didn't understand the concept because they're not applying it. And this is where our system would help, because honestly, if you think about it again, right, for that student who's memorizing the multiplication tables without the understanding of where they're going to use it, this feels like memorizing useless facts.
Right. It is a tough challenge to and let me ask you this first. On your platform, what is the age range for which you guys teach math this way?
So we do ages 2 and up. The highest elephant age is 13.05. Just turned out that way. And
I was going to say you should. I was going to say you should have rounded that off too, since you did the 1 year and 3 months rounding off.
Well, no, we placed the ages on the milestones as accurately as we could, because we want the elephant age to be accurate, because it's information to the parent, right, and it's information to the student. Actually, the place where it came from was the Wii Fitness age. When I was in grad school, I bought Wii Fitness, and I got on the stupid little board, and it gave me a Wii Fitness age of 40 years old. And I was like, you know what? I better do something about this, right? And I thought, you know what's the same thing? It's the math age. That's what it is. It's the elephant age. And the thing is when you put that in front of the student, they're going to want to make it go up. It's a natural phenomenon that happens with humans. It's what they tell you in business books, right? Make a one number metric. So that's what it is. I wanted to be as accurate as possible. And that's what I'm saying is where we finished off the curriculum, it averages out to 1305. So we didn't know how it would average, but I guess Alvaro knew how it would average, the curriculum designer. But I didn't know how it would average because I didn't do that, and I just at the end saw that. But to finish that thought, what we see, even at the university level, is that students have issues with algebra. So students that are struggling in high school and even at the university level, what we're seeing is that they didn't really catch those concepts for algebra. They didn't get beyond that. And to be honest for you, at the university level, that's frustrating. That's demotivating. The TA, the professor, they're kind of motivated to throw their hands up and say, like, here's how you solve it.
Right.
And hope that they can pass the test. And what we're finding out, though, is that we can go back and we can get them to understand those concepts. And to give you an idea of what we're talking about, like one of the things that, this is a true story. I talked to a professor in the business school, and I said, students don't understand why they're subtracting 5 from both sides. And he said, well, why are they subtracting 5 from both sides? And the reason why is because the equal sign means that the quantity on the left side of the equal sign and the quantity on the right side of the equal sign should be the same.
Right.
And the thing is that if you don't have that understanding, and a lot of students, for example, because of the way math is written in elementary school, they get the idea that the equal sign means evaluate. And there is no middle school teacher. I don't want to say no middle school teacher, right? But there are no middle school teachers out there at a mass scale saying, you know what, that means the student doesn't understand what the equal sign means, and we should explain that to them.
Right. Yeah. One of the issues that I kind of see as a problem with math is cumulative issue of a lot of students learn to pass a test, and if they don't get 100, let's say they get 90, which is still an A, right? And they're like, okay, or maybe 85, whatever, it's B. And then they continue on, and it just accumulates like plaque, it just kind of continues on accumulating because they didn't understand that 10% or 15%, or they just learn how to solve it for the, mechanically versus like really understanding what's happening. And then when you need to apply all of that they've learned thus far into some other concept right now that the deficiency comes out because all of these 5-10% or whatever that they didn't get now is critical in order to understand that next level, and they just can't make that, they can't breach that gap. And so you should basically learn math until you get 100% every single time, because so that you prove that you really understand the underlining the underlining issue, and not just solve mechanistically the problems that you are given, right? That's kind of like my thought on like where a lot of problems are happening. This is kind of like cumulative issue of like lagging behind on the understanding and just kind of focusing on mechanistic solution. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not sure if it's the 100% on the test that's the goal.
That's a goal, right?
I think that here's the thing is that like students are going to make mistakes, right? And it happens. Professors make mistakes. It's not a big deal, right? Mm-hmm. Let me put it this way. When you start getting into where you're going to actually use the mathematics in your career, so for example, if you're in the business school, it's now leaning very heavily on statistics because we're able to gather so much data about the world around us. And we have to understand what the output from the algorithms are and what it means. And then we got to be able to apply decision-making processes around that. And again, the meaning is important, right? So for example, I guess my marketing team, they're doing conversion rate optimization, and they just ran a test on the homepage, and they changed some text, and they saw a 14% lift in some metric, right? And then the question is, well, what does it mean? Should we move to that? Should we do that? Or right? So you have to have that understanding of what's going on there, because if you don't, then you're not going to be making decisions based on information, rather just kind of based on recommendation. Now, the professors are having a hard time getting the students to understand the statistics at the level of business so that they can, get these ideas to them so they can walk out for this. And again, it basically kind of boils down to a misunderstanding that happened earlier. So For example, it's possible for someone to get 90% on the test and completely understand what multiplication is. They just maybe didn't memorize their multiplication tables properly. I don't think that's as big of a deal because, for example, if I'm able to pull out a calculator and solve the problem because I'm able to apply multiplication to the real life situation and do it, that's 100 times more important than being able to just answer the question correctly, because at least I can pull out a calculator and do it. The mathematics is useful to me. So like, I don't know if the test score, honestly, is the deal. But the problem kind of tends to be, really, I mean, this is one of the problems, right? And this is serious. In the United States, people either pass the test and get by, or they're passed along to the next grade. And at nowhere in the process is there, let's go back and make sure that they understood the ideas that came beforehand. Maybe at the beginning of third grade, there's some sort of review, right? So that we can, pick up where we left off. But the problem is that in Europe, where, the math scores tend to be better after middle school, if your student didn't understand the materials taught in first grade, they're repeating the first grade. So whatever the metric of proficiency is, it has to be honored, right? Or we have to modify third grade to say, well, where is the level of the student actually from a level of understanding, and then catch them up. That's what our system does, right? That's what we designed it to do.
Doing math online and using a system like yours is allowing, that's why I like how you describe the the math age, or the elephant age, right? Because it's not how old you are, but how are you doing well with math, understanding where you are at your biological age, right? And I think what education is suffering from a lot is this concept of we all are going in lockstep as we are learning things, right? Whether it's math or something else. It's just basically like, hey, you are 7, this is the grade that you're in, or, you're 10 and this is the grade you're in, and, you're going to complete this 1 year, and then you're going to be in the next grade, lockstep with everybody else. But what if you're not getting something, you're lagging behind, and the worse, if they just push you through because they lower down the standards, then you continue to do this in lockstep versus right now we have the tools, especially like, online tools like yours and others, which you can do things asynchronously, and that education should be in that way, because then if you don't get that concept, you can play with it and play with it and play with it until you get it, instead of just kind of mechanistically, learn how to solve a problem so that you pass on, so you continue in this lockstep with the rest of the class. It should be more of an asynchronous approach to knowledge. You learn it until you get it, and that's when you prove that I really understand why I'm doing this and can apply it. And what are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you think that's what's going to happen in the future of education? Because I get it that right now, like, education has to be structured, and it's just from even administrative point of view, right? You just want to have kids of the same age in the same class kind of moving through this pipeline. But it's really
there's a feasibility issue.
Right. It's
right?
feasibility.
The feasibility issue is that the teacher, it's going to be very, very challenging for the teacher to figure out what level everyone's on. Again, that's what our system helps with. So our teacher portal tells the teacher that information so they can start to work with it. But that's the first problem, right? Is that if you're talking about 30 students, and on average they're 2 years behind, and you have students that are as much as 3 or 4 years behind from an understanding level, and then on top of that you got students that are actually ahead, right? That the feasibility of being able to teach to everybody's level is impossible. I think part of the systemic issue is the passing of students, right, before they understand, right? If we could keep them back, then they're going to actually be motivated to understand, number one. And number two, we're going to make sure that they don't go on to the next level unless they understand. So then the teacher can have some confidence that, okay, well, they learned this the previous year, so now that I'm talking about it, they have some experience with it. And that's actually what we're seeing, is that only the top 20% income earners are benefiting from the education system we have right now. The second graph that I was shown before I got into this project basically has the percentile at which you enter the schooling system by income, in quartiles of income, so 25%, and the percentile at which you exit. And they're all basically flat lines, with the top 20% entering at the highest level and exiting at the highest level, and only the top 50% even trending up, but not even that much, just trending up slightly. But the idea makes perfect sense, that if you understand the teacher, then the education system is effective. If you don't understand the teacher, well, then of course the education system is not going to be effective. And in fact, when you're finding a tutor for your student, right, the person that you're looking for is the person that your student best connects with, the person that your student's going to understand. So like, this isn't a science problem anymore. This isn't a statistics problem anymore. This is a logical issue. The logical issue is that the student doesn't have the base language to enter the classroom, so they can't understand the teacher. And that's why you have basically systematic mathematical anxiety. That's why you have systematically 75% of high school students not proficient at high school mathematics. That's why you have 69% of STEM majors switching to a major with less mathematics. That's how this happens.
Yeah. What do you think is going to happen next? And given that technology can supplement and do like what you do, and what do you see that going to? Like, what do you think education or specifically math is going to be in like 5-10 years, given that all these different tools and platforms like yourself, like your platform are showing up and are available to students?
Well, I can't predict that with any accuracy. But all
right, how about 1 year?
Well, this is what I'm going to tell you. Over here, what my real goal is if I can get second and third graders to understand algebra, then I can legitimately teach them to code. And if I can legitimately teach these children how to code, they're now going to be interacting with the computer, which is a mathematical object at a mathematical level. And we're going to be able to teach them mathematics that, to be honest with you, they might not even see to the college level. The Boolean algebra, you don't see until your sophomore year of computer science, to be honest with you, or Boolean algebra in mathematics. And the thing is that like logical thinking is not something that I think that only a fraction of the population needs. Logical thinking is something that all of the population needs, because we interact with computers on a daily basis. I mean, there are millions of things that I literally do to just start this company, where like, if I didn't have that stuff in the background, well, gosh, I mean, how would I pick it up so quickly, right? I mean, right. The way you tune your audience in Facebook, it's the same as what you do with an if statement in code. It's Boolean logic is what it is. And so like, if we can get the student this understanding early on, if we can get their mindset around, hey, this is how you solve problems, well then, I mean, I think that like, not only can we accelerate the student through, but then we can also have a democratization of the mathematics, which is really the issue, right? Because when you look at the high school dropout number, it's predictive based on 8th grade math scores. And the thing is that like the economic impact of those people not graduating from high school is like $320 billion for the lifetime of that person, lifetime wages, right? So it's a $320 billion impact, and that's for each year of people who drop out of high school. That was a 2007 statistic that we had found. So someone did a study on the impact on the economy of high school dropout, and that's what they said, 320 billion or 370, one of those two. But the point is that like, what is the trajectory for that student? And I mean, the psychological impact on top of that is important. We have an entire generation of students that we told, you can grow up to be anything you want to be. And they wanted to be STEM majors. They wanted to go in high jobs. They wanted to be business majors. And what they found out was that the mathematics required for them to understand that is more than they want to put in or that they can attain. And that's completely self-inflicted, right? I mean, our system is proving, hey, you could understand it if you want to, right? But they're moving then into humanities. And that's why we have a generation of people who would rather prefer that their student loans be forgiven. It's because they've come out as a humanities major where your salary is capped at a level where you're probably not going to be able to afford that student loan anymore.
Right. That is such an interesting perspective that you just mentioned over here, because it's not only that, hey, I'm not going to do math. It's like, how is that going to impact my life in terms of finances, economics, possibilities of engagement with employment, right? That's an important, I think, issue to kind of raise and think about as well, because it's not only like, I could just ask Google or something to solve this, or Mathematica, or like Wolfram Alpha, or it's one of those sites.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, is that you have to know what to type into Google to do that, right? I mean, when you don't understand these things, you don't know what to type into Google to get the answer. Right? You don't know what to punch into the I mean, that's literally the problem, right?
Right.
And here's the other thing, is that, like, I meet so many people who have figured it out over time, but they've got the story that they're bad at math. So the second they start talking to me, they start freaking out. Their math anxiety pops. And, like, they start telling me things. Like, so for example, one of my friends was telling me, well, I'm negotiating this deal with someone, and, that guy is just so fast at math. He's doing math in the room, like as we're writing down the numbers, and I'm just afraid that he's trying to screw me. What would you do in that situation? You'd be able to do the math in your head, wouldn't you? And I said, well, it depends on how important the numbers are, right? I think, right, at the final moment, I'd pull out my calculator and I'd do the math, because I'd want to know exactly how much I'm getting paid, or at least ballpark. I'd have to be in the right neighborhood, right? Yeah. And so, like, and they were aghast. They're like, you'd pull out a calculator? And I'd be like, yeah, but think about the position. The position is that the person who they're afraid is screwing them is going to think they're stupid because they pulled out their calculator.
Right. So it's a stigma, because it's like, hey, are you not smart enough to do this in your head? You got to use a calculator. So it's a larger issue, like a social issue almost.
Right. But the point is that they did know how to pull up the calculator and do it. Right. Now imagine if they weren't able to do that, right? Imagine, right? And that's really the thing, is that, like, they're telling me they're bad at math, but honestly, they're good at math because they can pull it. I mean, we know that 75% of Americans can't calculate a 20% tip. That's a factoid that keeps coming up, and in respected journals. And so, like, when you think about that, you say, okay, so roughly 3/4, and I mean, it's the same percentage of the people in high school that don't understand high school mathematics. So it lines right up, right? If you think about that idea, right? That's every day in business. If you're not working in percentage, decimals, and fractions, what are you doing? Like, I mean, how do you measure your growth? Because you measure it in percentages, right?
Right.
And if you don't know what 250% growth means, well, then how do you attain it?
Right. That just hamstrings you across the business sides of business development. Even if you want to be an entrepreneur, that's going to be affecting you, right there and then as well.
That's right. And again, right, most of the people that I've met, they get it. They completely know how to do it, but they've told themselves the story that they don't, right?
Right.
And so that's a problem. That's a separate problem. That's a different problem. But then at the same time, right, I mean, the idea is that if we could get that idea to these students at a time when it could make a difference, meaning when they're in the 5th grade learning the fractions, right, then we have a chance to make a different trajectory for that student, because they could get to college, they could get an engineering degree, they could go out and what's the difference in salary there, right? Yeah. Like, even starting salary, what's the difference in starting salary? It's a completely different lifestyle. And more, that's where the middle class is, and that's the problem, right? The middle class is dwindling, the cycle of poverty is continuing, and it's all because, well, we just didn't understand the math in preschool. And it wasn't honestly that hard to get the students to count to 10 if we would have sat down and taken the time.
Was this your motivation to start this company and do this? What is your why? Why are you doing this?
That absolutely, that's the why. So what was presented to me, so like the way I got started in this was I met up with a college professor of mine, and they had the initial like type of prototypes that were written in Flash, and we started a new business out of this. And basically, that's what he told me, was that 4 out of 5 students are entering kindergarten unprepared for the kindergarten curriculum. And at the end of the entire spiel, which I've already given you at this point through different questions,
right?
I looked at it and I said, so Alvaro, what you're trying to tell me is that I could fix the cycle of poverty if I could get 4-year-olds to count to 10. And you already know how to get them to count to 10 effectively. And he says, yeah. I go, all right, let's do this. Right? So the vision became change the way the world teaches mathematics, because if we can change the way the world teaches mathematics, then we have some sort of impact where what would it look like if the politicians and business people of tomorrow could speak and understand the same language as the scientists, right? I mean, and then beyond that, it became, okay, how do we accomplish that? So the purpose, the why, the mission becomes empower children with mathematics. If we can empower enough children with mathematics, the world has to turn and look at what we're doing and say, what are they doing that we're not doing, right? At this point, we've taught 1 million months of mathematics. We've had 80,000 students come through our system. We're starting to do that, right? We're starting to get the attention of, just to be honest, we were on the phone with a public school the other day, right? This typically wouldn't happen. They wouldn't typically take my call. We had no contacts in education. I was watching news reports about how teachers and principals were getting bribed to put their software in the classroom. I said, I don't got bribe money, Alvaro. I can't do that. Let's go talk to the parent. That's the best chance we have of empowering these children with mathematics. And you know what? The parent already knew there was a problem. We have parents coming to us telling us the same thing. So this message that I'm telling you, a lot of the parents might look at it and say, well, I already knew that. My student doesn't seem to get it. And that's what they're writing me, is that they don't seem to get the basic math facts. And that's literally what we're helping with. And then basically, after we empower enough children with mathematics through the parents, maybe we empower children through mathematics through the teacher, maybe we empower them through the class, through the districts or whatever, right? But the mission is empower children with mathematics. And that's what we hold first. We make all of our decisions through that as a team. In fact, we look at every position through the lens of empower children with mathematics. The idea being that, like, if we can effectively empower children with mathematics, if the team is effective on all fronts as far as empowering children with mathematics go, and we can tie the idea of empowering children with mathematics directly to revenue, even if we're giving parents that can't afford it scholarships that make it zero cost, right? We can do all of that. We would have a sustainable organization that exists outside of me, that's out there empowering children with mathematics, and it's off doing that in its own existence, right? So the important part then was tying the empower children with mathematics to a revenue, even though we're giving it away for free to some parents. And then at the same time, putting a system underneath it, which would be your EOS traction or your scaling up, or there's numerous business systems out there that you could just pick up. It's a book. You pick it up and you just implement it. And what it does is it gets alignment from a team. And it's just so much easier to align a team around a mission like empower children with mathematics, right? It's easier to get a sales team to maybe align around revenue goals because they're measurable, right? But when you've tied the two together, now it doesn't matter which you're talking about; they become synonymous.
Right. Do you think there's a chance that the education system is going to be open to even the possibility of integrating learning platforms like the one that you developed in their core curriculum, or is that something that is so too far out that parents will just have to take it into their own hands? I mean, you mentioned that a school reached out to you, or you started talking to a school, so it almost sounds like they see that something like this is needed. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think that they're going to see the results and be like, wow, okay, this is good, we should do more of this all over the place? Or do you think it's just so entrenched the way we have our core curriculum set up, the Common Core, that there's no chance that we can implement these things in and modify how we teach math?
Well, the main issue tends to be that the motivator for Common Core is the same as the motivator for No Child Left Behind, which is that if you can get the math scores up, then you can get a raise as a teacher. Mm-hmm. And so this becomes a way for them to get the math scores up, but all that the understanding underneath that will make what they're doing effective. And so what we've done is we've essentially made this free for schools, but we've made parents pay. And the reason why we've done that is because whenever we've interviewed teachers in the classroom, their biggest struggle was having compliance from the parent at home to getting the student to use it. Now with COVID-19, the issue is that all of the parents are at home, all of the students are at home. There's not the classroom option where the teacher says, okay, for the next 15 minutes, you guys are doing this. And so the parent always has to do it. So we need to get the buy-in from the parent. Again, scholarships are available for those who really need it. And actually, everyone would get a scholarship through the school program. But this parent is able to share the data with the teacher, which means that now we've solved the problem, which was challenging in the classroom, is now impossible with Zoom, right? Meaning that how does the teacher get a good sense of who's understanding and who's not understanding? And my understanding of what COVID-19 schooling is going to look like is they're breaking these students into cohorts anyway. And so what you probably want to do is you want to say, well, these are the students that are struggling with the concept of addition. Let's put them together, right? These are the students that are struggling with the concepts of three-digit numbers. Let's put them together. And here's the students that are at grade level or beyond, so they're going to understand the lecture at this level, and let's deal with them separately. And so now that they're going to split the classroom up, is my understanding, is like on one day it's these 10 students, on one day it's those 10 students. Well, now they can focus on what's most important to those 10 students. So when I showed this to the public school, they said, you basically built this for COVID. And I mean, the thing is we had been working on that teacher portal for years. We've been interviewing teachers. We knew the data that we want them to see. We knew how to display it to them. We just didn't know how to monetize it. And now the monetization technique makes perfect sense. The teacher recommends it to the parent buys it so that the teacher can get the information.
I never thought I would say this, but the silver lining of this whole COVID pandemic and is that we are revisiting how we are looking at things that were so entrenched in our day-to-day, standard approach that, as bad as it is, people dying and all of that, it's forcing us to rethink how we do things. And so there is a silver lining in that, because what you just described in a way is kind of opening up a possibility for schools to using a software that's going to allow those who are struggling with specific set of problems to kind of focus on it in asynchronous way with the rest of the class who are may have different problems or may not have problems at all and can kind of continue on, which is something that it's unprecedented, because just from the structure of our educational system, we have these just fixed classes and fixed time frames, windows, how we educate. And you either make it or you don't make it, or we're going to kind of push you through by lowering standards. So, COVID is in a way is a blessing in disguise over here and helping out, reassess how we kind of do this. Good for you.
To some degree, yes. To some degree, no. I mean, it depends on how you want to look at it, right? Because also, I mean, with the minimal amount of time that they're going to get in the classroom in the fall, if this is the plan, right, then I mean, that's going to be counteracted. At the same time, though, if we can get this in the hands of the students that need it, we see students recover extremely quickly. We did a pilot with this teacher portal in Tulsa, Oklahoma. There was a refugee nonprofit that I think they had 30 students in the class or something like that. But on average, they learned about 1.25 years of math. It was about 11 weeks. Again, 22 minutes on average, 22 minutes on average. And the deal was that we didn't even know what their educational background was, meaning that some of these students may have even had problems with English. For the students that it worked, meaning that there was a set of students where maybe the placement exam they got was too challenging. But for the students that were set up correctly, right, they learned on average 3 years of mathematics. They would come in around 6, 7-year-old level. These are 8, 9, 10-year-olds at that time, 8, 9, or 10 being the oldest, and we would see them catch up and go beyond their age. And the thing is that, the mathematical experiences that a 9-year-old has had in the classroom, it doesn't go away just because they didn't understand, right? So when we give them the idea of what the concept is and it clicks for them, all of those experiences suddenly make sense for them. And so they're able to jettison forward very, very quickly. So we see the student literally catch up to their age, and then they're able to walk into the classroom and understand the teacher. And that's, again, to us, the most important thing. They might have missed how to add on the clock because we didn't cover it. And then maybe they want to go back and revisit it, or honestly, they'd be able to pick it up very easily at that point. But if they're able to step into the classroom and understand the teacher where the teacher is right now, that's the key. So if the teacher did implement this, if we were able to get into classrooms all over the country at a high rate, what you would see is that all of a sudden these guys would get up to the class. So they'd start out with these cohorts, but by the end of the year, all of the cohorts would be in the same place or ahead.
Yeah, that is, and that's like, I think, one of the unique capabilities of technology as well, that is allowing at a feasible level of price point and a tool that allows you to do that stuff. So even though different parts of the class have different issues with, and it can asynchronously catch up, and then by the end of the year still kind of go as a class to the next grade. I think that's a fantastic use of technology and capability. What are some of the things that you want to send as a message to those who are watching this show, and parents particularly who are struggling with maybe their kids having issues with math? What are some of the things that you want to kind of tell them, and points that you want to highlight? What is on your mind that you want to kind of, like, this is your bullhorn right now? What is the message that you want to tell them?
Sure. So, I think for mathematics, and this is why I created the system the way I created it, it's a tool to help me teach my child mathematics. That's what it was, right? And the key is you always want to be working with your student at their level of understanding. It's true for mathematics, and it's true for everything else, right? I mean,
right.
At the end of the day, no matter what you're kind of working on, it boils down to the jargon. So, for example, if you want to teach your student about rebuilding car engines, right? They have to understand what all the parts are. I don't know anything about car engines, so I'm not going to be able to use any of the jargon as an example at this point. But I mean, but that's what it is. And so if you have a student that's struggling and you want to start helping them, the best thing you can do is you can start to find out what that level is. And our system has a placement exam that's designed to do exactly that. The placement exam is a part of the tool. So sometimes a student might exit early because they hit skip, not knowing that skip tells our system that this is too hard for them. But you can always put a subject back into test out mode. So we will help you find their level, with 100% accuracy, within 3 to 5 days, right? And so within those 3 to 5 days, we give you their level. We give you a very detailed report that you could go and show your teacher so that the teacher can understand, well, the student missed these questions and it was real that they actually missed them. And it seems like they might know this in the classroom, but they don't know this when the problem is presented to them. And they can quickly start to work with the student at that level and start to catch them up. If the student is ahead, it's the same story, right? So the system works the same for a student that's behind, for a student that's ahead, for the student that's right on grade level, right? We find that level, whatever it is, and then we start building them from there. And that's the most important thing that a parent can do, beyond switching the mindset from how do I do this? And to be honest with you, that's also challenging, right? Because when a student walks up to you and says, I don't know how to do this, look, I'm trained at this. My first instinct is to now show the student how to solve the problem, right? You got to stop. You got to ask yourself, well, okay, how can I figure out what's their level of understanding here? Do they understand what's going on and they don't know how to do it? Or do they not understand what's going on? And there's certain techniques that we teach parents on how to do that in our coaching. So, these are the tips that I would give parents right now. I think this is of the utmost importance. And I think that if we could just teach the students how to count to 10, meaning just identify the numbers, play how many with them, and then ask them to give you a certain number of things, right? If you could do that with your 4-year-olds, you'll avoid the problem to begin with.
Well, thank you for sharing this, your knowledge in this, and sharing your perspective on what are some of the issues and connecting the dots. I think that's the biggest value that I kind of drew from this conversation is you highlighted not only what are some of the issues, but what are the repercussions of that and how that affects these students long term, and how what later happens is not something that just magically happens at some point, but it has a root early on. And it seems that we need to kind of change our maybe even vocabulary, or like the reframe how we look at math in terms of understanding it and applying it versus just kind of learning the mechanistic way of solving problems or problems for the math just to pass a test. And then that's kind of like the main points that I got out of this conversation. And thank you for building this platform and for doing these right steps, and hopefully you're going to be able to change the educational system's mind in terms of how and what they can integrate in their own schooling, or utilizing this tool that now parents can supplement their kids' understanding and learning of math with to kind of getting them up to speed, and help them not even getting up to speed, but help them reframe how they look at math. And so I wish you the best of luck. Thank you again for being on the show. If you want to learn more about the product, it's Elephant Learning, and the website is elephantlearning.com. And Aditya Nagrath was our guest on the show, and thank you for being again. And if you have any comments or questions, please post them in the YouTube channel in our comments section. We'd love to learn from you what you got out of this conversation, and what are some of the challenges that you see with your kids and maybe yourself with math. It'll be an interesting conversation. Maybe we can circle back with Aditya and talk about it, and see from our perspectives what kind of issues people are dealing with. But again, thank you for being on the show. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care now.
Thanks for listening to a podcast with interesting people. Please subscribe and leave a review or comment.
And support us by sharing our episodes on social media. We really appreciate it. And for more information, visit us at apodcast.com. Thanks.